Morning they showed up at my door. I'd just poured my first cup of coffee. I remember that clearly. The steam rising, the smell of dark roast filling the kitchen, the Cardinals game on low in the background. I'd been retired for 8 months. Life was finally quiet. And then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I never am, out here in Bentonville, Arkansas, on 3 acres with a pond out back, and nobody's business but my own. When I looked through the peephole and saw my son-in-law standing there in a sport coat, like he was applying for a job, my stomach dropped somewhere below the floorboards. 12 years. That's how long it had been since my daughter decided I wasn't worth keeping around. Let me back up. My name is Eugene Lattimore. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a finish carpenter, trim work, custom cabinetry, the kind of craftsmanship that people notice when they walk into a room, even if they can't name exactly why. I wasn't getting rich doing it, but I was good at it, genuinely good. And when I turned 51, I took the money I'd saved and I opened a small millwork shop in Fayetteville. Custom built-ins, kitchen islands, coffered ceilings. Word spread. I hired 4 guys, then 8, then 12. By the time I was 58, Lattimore Custom Millwork had contracts with 3 of the largest residential builders in northwest Arkansas. We were doing commercial work too, hotels, a few restaurants, a law firm's lobby downtown that I'm still proud of every time I drive past it. The business was worth something real. I wasn't a millionaire in the flashy sense, but I owned the building, I owned the equipment outright, and I had a lake house in Bella Vista that I paid cash for. My daughter Renata hadn't spoken to me in 12 years. I need to be honest about something here, because I'm not interested in telling a story where I'm a saint. I wasn't a perfect father. After her mother and I divorced, she was 9, her brother was 6. I worked too much. I missed things I shouldn't have missed. Her high school graduation, I remember. I had a bid deadline and I told myself I'd make it up to her. I didn't. When she was in her mid-20s, she sat me down and told me all of this, and I listened, and I thought we'd started to repair things. Then she married Clifton. I want to be fair to him too, in the way you try to be fair about a person you've come to distrust completely. Clifton Marsh was charming. He had one of those voices that made everything sound reasonable. He sold commercial real estate in Springdale, drove a leased Escalade, wore his hair in that slicked-back style that was fashionable for about 4 minutes in 2012 and that he never let go of. When I first met him, I thought he was a little much. I kept that to myself. The first time he called me just a contractor was at Thanksgiving 2 years into their marriage. He was talking about someone else, a neighbor, I think, and the contempt in his voice when he said it, the dismissive little exhale. I looked at Renata. She laughed. That was when I understood something had shifted. Over the next 2 years, the distance grew. Calls got shorter. Visits stopped happening. My granddaughter, Piper, was born during that time, a fact I learned from my son, not from Renata. I sent a gift. I didn't hear back. I tried twice more to reach out and got polite, brief responses that said nothing. Then one morning I got an email. Not a call, an email. From Renata telling me that she and Clifton had decided they needed space from the negativity in their lives, and that included me. She said I'd never been emotionally present. She said Clifton felt I didn't respect him. She said she hoped I'd reflect on that. I printed that email out. I don't know why. I kept it in a drawer in my office for years. Sometimes I'd take it out and read it again, hoping to find something I'd missed, some explanation that made more sense. I never found one, so I did what you do. I kept working. The business grew. I bought the lake house. I started restoring a 1966 Ford Bronco in my garage on weekends, which gave me something to do with my hands when my mind got too loud. My son Daryl and I stayed close. He lives in Tulsa now with his family, and we talk every Sunday without fail. I had a life. It didn't have Renata in it, and that ached in a way that doesn't go away, but it was a real life. I retired at 63. Sold 70% of the business to my shop foreman and 2 senior employees, good people who'd earned it, and retained a minority stake that still pays dividends. I bought a newer property outside Bentonville. 4 bedrooms, a workshop out back where I could keep working on the Bronco, a covered porch that faces east so I get the morning light. I didn't post about it online. I'm not on social media. I mentioned it to a few old friends at church. Apparently, word travels anyway. The doorbell rang on a Thursday morning in late October. I looked through the peephole and saw Clifton in that sport coat, Standing behind him was Renata, and next to her a girl of about 12 who I barely recognized but somehow knew immediately. Piper, my granddaughter, 12 years old, and I'd never had a conversation with her. I stood at that door for a long moment. I opened it, not because I'd forgiven them, not because I was weak. I opened it because Piper was standing there looking at her shoes, and she hadn't done anything to me, and I'm not the kind of man who punishes a child for her parents' choices. "Dad," Renata said. She was smiling in that careful, curated way people smile when they want something. "Wow, this place is incredible." Clifton was already looking past me into the house, doing the mental math that men like him always do in other people's homes, calculating square footage, appraising finishes, counting rooms. "We were in the area," he said. "Thought we'd stop by. They live 40 minutes away. I stepped back and let them in. I made coffee. I didn't offer to share and set it on the counter. I sat at the kitchen table. They sat across from me." Piper sat beside her mother and looked around at everything with the wide, careful eyes of a kid who's been told before the visit how to act. Renata led. She talked for about 10 minutes about nothing. Her neighborhood, a kitchen renovation she was planning, how she'd heard the Bentonville art scene had really taken off. Clifton nodded along and made small affirming noises. I listened. Then she said, "We've been doing a lot of reflecting lately about family." "Have you?" I said. "You know the last few years have been hard for everyone." She paused. "We'd love to start rebuilding the relationship with you." And we thought, well, Clifton thought, that it might make sense to do that in a real committed way, like living closer. I looked at Clifton. "There's a lot of space here," he said, gesturing vaguely at the house around him. "4 bedrooms, you said? And it's just you." "I didn't say that," I said. "I don't know who told you that." He waved his hand. "Someone at your church, I think. Point is, Piper's getting to an age where she should know her grandfather. Renata misses you." We were thinking, what if we moved in for a while, just until we get our footing? The real estate market's been brutal. We're in a tough spot financially. I looked at my daughter. "How long is a while?" "A year," Renata said. "Maybe 2. I kept my face very still. I'd learned to do that over 30 years in a trade where clients change their minds and you can't let them see how much it costs you. "Tell me about the tough spot," I said. Clifton shifted. "Market turned on us. I had a few deals go sideways. Nothing permanent, just a cash flow issue." "How much cash flow?" He hesitated. "We're behind on the mortgage. 3 months. The bank's been patient, but..." "How much is the mortgage?" Another pause. $4,000 a month. I nodded slowly. "And the Escalade?" "That's a lease. The lease payment, $1,100. So you're spending $5,000 a month on a house and a car that you don't own, and you can't cover, and you'd like to move into mine." Renata reached across the table and put her hand on my arm. "Dad, we're not here to ask for a handout. We just want to be close to family. Piper wants to know you. That's real." I looked at Piper. She was picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. She glanced up, and our eyes met briefly, and she looked back down. I excused myself. I went to my bedroom. I called my attorney, a man named Beach, who I've used for 20 years and who picks up on the second ring. I told him what was happening. He told me what I'd already suspected. I also called Daryl. "Eugene," Daryl said. "He calls me by my name sometimes when he's being serious. Do not let that man establish residency in your house." "I know. Do you? Because if he's there 30 days, in Arkansas..." "I know, Daryl." "Okay. What do you need from me? Just stay on the phone for a minute." I sat on the edge of my bed and looked out the window at the pond. A heron was standing at the far edge, still as a lawn ornament. I watched it for a while. Then I went back out. "Here's what I want you to understand about the next 3 weeks, because I'm not going to pretend it was simple or that I handled it perfectly." I told them they could stay for the weekend. Just the weekend. Because Piper was there, and I wanted the chance to know her a little. Renata looked relieved. Clifton looked satisfied, which is a different thing. The first day, Piper and I sat on the back porch after dinner, and I showed her a red-tailed hawk that nests in the big sycamore past the pond. She knew what it was before I said it. She told me she was interested in wildlife biology and that she'd been watching a nest cam of bald eagles in Iowa for 3 months. She talked carefully at first, like she was choosing each word, and then somewhere in the second hour she forgot to be careful and just talked. I found out she liked old music, real old music, like Patsy Cline and Merle Haggard, because her grandmother on her mother's side had played it constantly. I found out she'd been told I didn't care about her. I didn't say anything about that. Not to Piper. Clifton, meanwhile, had started measuring things. Not literally, at first. But he walked through rooms with a look on his face that I recognized from clients who come in, planning to redecorate before the ink is dry on the purchase agreement. On Sunday morning, I came downstairs to find him on the back porch on a phone call, talking to someone about what sounded very much like my workshop. Square footage out back is probably 700, he was saying. Separate structure, electrical's already run, could be converted to a rental unit pretty easily. I stood in the doorway and listened. He turned and saw me and finished the call without missing a beat. Hey, good morning. Just thinking out loud with a buddy of mine in development. You ever thought about the income potential on that workshop? It's where I keep my Bronco, I said. Right, just a thought. That afternoon, Renata approached me in the kitchen while I was making lunch. She said Clifton had been under a lot of pressure and that his ideas about the workshop came from a good place. She said she knew the situation was complicated. She said the word boundaries several times in the way people do when they've recently learned it. Then she said, "There's also something I need to tell you about Piper." I turned from the stove. She told me that over the past year, as things had gotten harder financially, they'd needed to make some difficult decisions, that Clifton had borrowed money from a private lender, not a bank, and that the terms had gotten complicated, that as collateral at some point, they'd listed assets including, and she paused here, long enough that I knew what was coming was bad, including a trust account that had been set up in Piper's name. By Renata's mother, before she died. $30,000 that was supposed to be for Piper's college. I set down the spatula. He used Piper's college fund as collateral for a loan, I said. It's more complicated than that. Renata. I looked at her directly. Yes or no? She looked at the counter. Yes. I didn't raise my voice. I found, as I've gotten older, that the moments when you most want to raise your voice are exactly the moments when you shouldn't. I asked her for the name of the lender. She hesitated. I told her that if she didn't give it to me, she and Clifton would need to find somewhere else to be by morning. She gave it to me. I called Beach again. He had a contact who knew the lender, a private outfit operating in a legal gray area. Not illegal exactly, but the kind of operation that regulators pay attention to when someone gives them a reason to. He told me what to do. That evening I invited my son-in-law to walk with me down to the pond. It was cool. The kind of October evening where the light goes gold late and the air smells like dry leaves. He was in a good mood, which told me everything about how he'd read the situation. I want to lay some things out plainly, I said. Sure thing, he said. I know about the private loan. I know about Piper's trust account. I know the lender's name and I know what they've agreed to. I paused. I also know that what was done with a minor's trust account without proper legal authorization is not simply a financial mistake. It's something that a judge tends to take an interest in. He stopped walking. I've spent the last 3 days talking to my attorney, I said. I've also been talking to a financial crimes investigator who does consulting work. Not because I wanted to blow this up, because I needed to understand my options. Eugene, I'm talking. I said it calmly. Here's what's going to happen. Piper's trust is going to be made whole. My attorney is drawing up an agreement tonight that transfers responsibility for that debt to you personally, separate from any account in her name. You're going to sign it. In exchange, I'm not going to refer the lender arrangement to the AG's Consumer Protection Office, which I have already spoken with informally, and which would find it very interesting. He stared at me. You came here thinking I was a soft target, I said. An old man with more house than he needs, who'd be so grateful to have his daughter back that he'd hand over the keys to the kingdom. I understand why you thought that. I want you to know that was a significant miscalculation. Renata is your daughter, he said. You can't just, my daughter is welcome in my life any time she chooses to be. That is a separate conversation that she and I will have, privately, without you present. I looked at him. That's not a negotiation. He signed the paperwork 2 days later in Beach's office on College Avenue in Fayetteville. He didn't say much, On the way out, he made a comment about lawyers and how the system is rigged for people with money, which I thought was an interesting position for someone who just gambled a 12-year-old's college savings. Renata and I talked. It took a long time and more than one conversation. I'm not going to dress it up as a reconciliation scene because it wasn't. What it was honest. She told me things that were hard to hear about how she'd let her marriage narrow her world down to only what Clifton approved of. I told her things that were hard to say about the years I wasn't present when she was young. We didn't hug at the end of it and agree that everything was fine. But we didn't hang up either. We're still talking. That's something. Piper is a different story. Not complicated. Clear. She started calling me on her own about 2 months later, on Saturdays, to tell me about whatever hawk or owl or shorebird she'd been tracking that week. I ordered her a copy of the Sibley Guide to Birds of Eastern North America, the big hardcover one, and mailed it without any note, because sometimes a gift is just a gift. She texted me to say it was the best thing she'd ever received, which I don't believe entirely, but which I appreciated enormously. This past spring, she spent 3 weeks with me here at the house. We fixed up a corner of the workshop as a kind of field station for her, a spotting scope on a tripod, a whiteboard where she could track sightings, a shelf for her field notebooks. She's 14 now. She wants to study ornithology at the University of Arkansas and then go to graduate school. She talks about it the way I used to talk about my work when I was young and still believe that what I was going to build mattered. I think it does matter. I think it does matter. I think her life is going to be one of the things I'm most proud of, and I had almost nothing to do with the first 12 years of it. That's the part I sit with on the porch in the evenings, the wasted time. The years when I could have pushed harder, sent one more letter, driven 40 minutes and knocked on a door that might not have opened. I tell myself the circumstances were what they were. Some days I believe it, but here's what I know for certain. When they came to my door that October morning thinking I was an easy mark, they were wrong about almost everything except one thing. They were right that there was something here worth having. They just had the wrong idea about what it was. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the workshop, or the pond, or the minority stake in the business. It was a girl with a spotting scope and a whiteboard full of bird names, standing on my back porch in the early morning light, completely still, watching the tree line for something the rest of us would have missed. That was always the thing worth having. They just never looked closely enough to see it.